trying to do useful things.
For 50 years, winning most of the military space launches in America was considered impossible for a single new company. The government had rules that were very strict. The missions were very risky because they carried satellites that protect the whole country. If a rocket failed, a spy satellite worth more than $1 billion would be lost. NASA and the Space Force relied on a monopoly called ULA, which was owned by Boeing and Lockheed Martin. Experts said that a startup company could never provide the safety or the low cost needed for national security. Then SpaceX made the impossible routine. They showed that a reusable rocket could be more reliable than one that is thrown away. Here is how they transformed the most secretive part of the space industry. The hardest part of this challenge was the way everyone thought about rockets. For decades, the best engineers in the world believed that rockets had to be used once and then dropped into the ocean. This was called being expendable. It was the industry standard. When NASA built the space shuttle, they tried to make it reusable, but that system was very complex and cost about $1.5 billion for every single launch. That is enough money to buy every person in a small city a brand new car. Because the shuttle was so expensive, the military went back to using rockets that they threw away after one use. Companies like Boeing and ULA built the Delta and Atlas rockets. These rockets worked well, but they were very slow to build. They were also very expensive. Every time the Space Force wanted to launch a satellite, they had to pay for a whole new rocket to be built from scratch. This created a bottleneck for our national security. If we needed to replace a satellite quickly, we could not do it. We had to wait months or even years for a new rocket to be ready. The technical reason experts said reuse would not work for heavy rockets was the weight of the fuel. To land a rocket, you have to save some fuel to fire the engines during the descent. Engineers thought that the weight of this extra fuel would take away too much space from the satellite. They believed you could not carry a heavy military satellite and still have enough fuel left to land safely. They also worried about the heat. When a rocket comes back from space, it moves at thousands of miles per hour. The air rubs against the rocket and makes it very hot. This heat can destroy the precise parts of the engine. Experts at the big aerospace companies said that fixing a rocket after it landed would cost more than just building a new one. They compared it to trying to fly a plane across the ocean and then having to rebuild the entire engine before it could fly back. Because of this, the military stayed with the old way of doing things for a long time. The breakthrough came when SpaceX developed a technology called supersonic retropropulsion. This is a fancy way of saying they figured out how to fire their engines while the rocket was still moving faster than the speed of sound toward the ground. For a long time, people thought the air moving past the rocket would make the engine flame unstable. They thought it would be like trying to light a match in a hurricane. But SpaceX engineers found a way to use the Merlin 1D engine to create a stable cushion of fire. This fire slowed the rocket down from thousands of miles per hour to a gentle stop. This was the key innovation that changed everything. Here's how they actually did it. They designed the Merlin engine to be very simple and very tough. It uses a Pintle injector, which is a part that sprays fuel into the engine. This design is much more stable than what other companies use. It allows the engine to change its power smoothly, kind of like how you can press the gas pedal in your car a little or a lot to change your speed. This is called throttling. Most old rockets could only be on or off. By being able to change the power, the SpaceX rocket can adjust its balance as it lands. It is like trying to balance a broomstick on your finger while you are moving. You need those small adjustments to keep it from falling over. Another major breakthrough was the use of grid fins. These are 4 metal pieces at the top of the rocket that look like waffle irons. They stay folded against the side of the rocket during the climb to space. When the rocket comes back down, they flip out. These fins act like small wings that can steer the rocket through the air. Even though the rocket is 50 meters tall, which is about the height of a 15-story building, these fins allow it to land on a specific spot in the ocean. This spot is usually a drone ship that is not much bigger than the rocket itself. While the old companies were still throwing their rockets away, SpaceX was landing theirs on a moving boat. They also developed a special heat shield material called Pika-X. This material protects the rocket from the high heat of re-entry. It works a bit like a candle. As it gets hot, the very top layer burns away in a controlled way, which carries the heat away from the rocket. This kept the expensive metal parts of the rocket safe so they could be used again. These technical wins led to huge competitive victories in the market. In 2020, the U.S. Space Force finished a big competition for the National Security Space Launch Program. They looked at the data and saw that SpaceX was flying more often than anyone else. SpaceX now flies the Falcon 9 about 140 times per year. That is more than twice every single week. This high frequency means they get more practice than any other company. Because they practice so much, they have become the most reliable rocket in history. The Space Force gave SpaceX 40% of all their secret missions for 5 years. This was a massive shift in power. Before this, ULA had 100% of the work. Now, the newcomer was taking the biggest share of the most important jobs. The numbers tell the story of this victory clearly. One NASA report showed that an SLS rocket launch costs about $4.1 billion. That is enough money to buy everyone in the city of Houston a new car. In contrast, a SpaceX Falcon 9 launch costs the government about $67 million. That means the government could launch 60 SpaceX rockets for the price of just one SLS flight. This price difference is so big that it changed the way the military thinks about their budget. They can now afford to launch more satellites and build a better defense system. The competitive scoreboard is also clear when you look at other companies. Boeing has struggled with its Starliner spacecraft. In 2019, a software error caused a major failure during its first big test flight. Since then, Boeing has spent years trying to fix the problems. Meanwhile, SpaceX has already flown many missions with people on board for NASA. They also charge much less. A seat on a SpaceX Dragon costs about $55 million. A seat on a Russian rocket used to cost the US about $90 million. By doing it themselves and using reusable parts, SpaceX saved the country hundreds of millions of dollars. This mastery of engineering has moved the industry from the old way to a new era. The military no longer sees reuse as a risk. They now see it as a sign of a better system. If a rocket can land and fly again, it proves that the parts are strong. If you throw a rocket away every time, you never really know if it had a small problem that almost caused a failure. But when you land it, you can take it apart and look at every bolt and wire. This information hunt allows engineers to make the rocket better every time it flies. This is why the Space Force recently approved SpaceX to use rockets that have already flown many times for their most expensive satellites. This was a huge vote of confidence. It showed that the military leaders now believe that a used SpaceX rocket is just as safe as a brand new one from a competitor. The victory of this model is seen in the response from other countries too. China is now trying to build its own reusable rockets. They have seen what SpaceX has done and are trying to copy the grid fins and the engine designs. China plans to land their own people on the moon by 2030. They are moving fast and they hit their deadlines very well. Their recent space station was built exactly on time. For the United States to stay ahead, we have to use the fastest and most efficient technology we have. Relying on slow, expensive rockets would let other countries catch up to us. This is why the partnership between the Space Force and SpaceX is so important for the future. It is not just about saving money. It is about being able to launch more stuff into space faster than anyone else. The future projection of this breakthrough is even more exciting. SpaceX is currently testing a much larger rocket called Starship. This rocket is 120 meters tall, which is as tall as a 40-story building. It is designed to be fully reusable, meaning both the top and bottom parts will land and fly again. It will be able to carry 100 tons of cargo. That is as heavy as 15 fully loaded pickup trucks. The Space Force has already started planning for this. They recently approved a plan to use a launch site called SLC-37 for Starship flights. This site was once used for the heavy Delta rockets that the military is retiring. Replacing an old, expensive rocket with a new, reusable one is the final step in this transformation. If Starship works as planned, the cost of spaceflight will drop even further. SpaceX says it could eventually cost only $10 million per launch. When you compare that to the $4.1 billion for an SLS launch, you can see why the entire industry is changing. What was once a science fiction dream is now daily work. The pattern of success is clear. First, everyone said reuse was impossible. Then SpaceX proved them wrong by landing a few rockets. Next, they showed it was safe by doing it hundreds of times in a row. Finally, the military leaders looked at the numbers and decided to move their most important missions to the new system. Justice in the world of engineering comes through results. You cannot argue with a rocket that lands on a boat in the middle of a storm. You cannot argue with a price tag that is 60 times lower than the competition. The transition is complete. The old way of throwing rockets away is over. The new way of flying, landing, and flying again is the new standard for the United States. SpaceX didn't just land a rocket, they made the impossible routine for the most demanding customer in the world. With over 200 successful landings and a dominant share of the national security market, they have proven that technical mastery beats the old way of doing business. This victory has saved billions of dollars and ensured that America can launch its most important satellites whenever they are needed. Now, as Starship begins to fly, the same transformation will happen at an even bigger scale. The impossible is now infrastructure, and the path to the moon and Mars is finally open for business.